Well, joining me now is Chase Sr., the host of the 49ers Report. Thanks for being with me.
Appreciate you having me. I'm really excited to talk Niners.
You know, we had a couple minutes to talk just before we started rolling here, and we both noted that this offseason hasn't been as explosive for the 49ers as what some other teams have done. Where would you say the temperature is for 49ers fans on how the team is currently constituted and how good they'll be next season?
I think the fan base is somewhat split, and I think a lot of the fans have to be a little bit more realistic, right? I mean, this is a team that made it to the NFC Championship game. They were in the Final Four. They were a couple of plays away from making it to their second Super Bowl in 3 years. So when you projected at that point toward the offseason, I think there were some expectations that there weren't going to be a lot of major moves, and up to this point, there hasn't really been any major moves. We all thought that Jimmy Garoppolo was going to get traded. He didn't. And $26 million is still on the cap. So because of that, the 49ers have been unable to make a big splash outside of the signing of Charvarius Ward. And I think that's why some of the fans are frustrated. They thought Jimmy Garoppolo is going to get dealt. Trey Lance is going to be handed the keys to Kyle Shanahan's offense. Then we're going to be able to make maybe a splash signing or two or in free agency. And right now, up to this point, it's really only been Charvarius Ward and a lot of other moves on the peripheries of the roster. So I think fans are frustrated because of that. But a lot of people are also saying there's no way that the 49ers are going to compete in 2022. I actually happen to disagree. I think they have an elite head coach in Kyle Shanahan. I think they have elite players on both sides of the ball in Trent Williams, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Fred Warner, Nick Bosa. I like the Charvarius Ward signing because it improves the secondary. We'll see what happens at that safety spot. Jimmy Ward's coming off arguably the best year of his career. But everybody, I think, because of the lack of moves, thinks that the Niners aren't going to be good. I think they're going to be good because they started to find their groove. And in fact, I think the offense is going to be a little bit better with Trey Lance because he's a lot more explosive and brings a lot more to the offense as compared to Garoppolo.
Because you mentioned Deebo, let's start there. I mean, what is the latest with him?
The latest with Deebo Samuel is that he wants to get paid, but all of the power is in the hands of the San Francisco 49ers. And if you look at the history with how they've done business, they don't give contract extensions to those players currently on their rookie deals until training camp. They did it with George Kittle. They did it with Fred Warner. So historically, there's been a trend of when they decide to pay some of their own homegrown talents. And I think Deebo Samuel's going to get paid. I think Nick Bosa is going to get paid. But I think Deebo Samuel is frustrated right now because the wide receiver market is exploding. And he's seeing all of these other wide receivers land monster contracts. Devontae Adams, after he got traded to the Raiders, had at that time signed a record-breaking contract, and Tyreek Hill was able to overtake him. He's making the most money per year of any wide receiver in the history of the league, average annual value of $30 million. Stephon Diggs wanted to get paid by Buffalo. He did. He's now making $20 million. And I think Deebo looks at those wide receivers and he's like, okay, they're great. I'm great too. I can make the argument personally, that Deebo Samuel was the most valuable offensive player outside of quarterbacks this past year. And he probably looks at those other guys getting paid and he's like, they're not doing what I'm doing. They're not inventing a new position in wide back. They're not contributing as a running back, as a wide receiver, outside in the slot, picking up yards after the catch. And when you need me to return kicks, I can do that too. So Deebo Samuel, understandably so, is frustrated because he's trying to lock down a contract worth in the neighborhood of, I think, $25+ million. And I think at some point he's going to get paid because the Niners understand fully his value to the offense. He just has to be a little bit patient. I also think that there are some injury concerns with Deebo. He's never played a full season in his first 3 years since getting drafted in the second round out of South Carolina. So when you're making a big investment, of course, you have to go through and have all of these conversations.
He's certainly proven how dynamic he can be. And you just noted it. I mean, to watch him as a fan is just incredible because you know that he's so reliable, can do so many different things. You mentioned the injuries. I mean, do you see this, even though the 49ers have a lot of leverage here, as a situation where they need to make him happy because you don't want a player like that they're going to have to rely on so much, assuming that he's healthy, to be unhappy heading into next season?
Yeah, I think it's cool with how the Niners are playing it right now just because of what I talked about with how they historically do business. And John Lynch, the general manager, has said multiple times on multiple occasions, we have money budgeted for Deebo Samuel and Nick Bosa, both members of that historic draft class a couple of years ago and two franchise pillars. Now, I will say that if it gets to a point where he becomes disgruntled, he's already deleted all 49ers related content off of his Instagram. One of his buddies had posted on Instagram over the weekend, if it ain't 25 mil, then we ain't about it. And Deebo commented. So I think he wants something in that neighborhood. I think they're playing it right now. But as we move forward, you're going to have to make them happy. We see this in the NFL. We see this in the NBA with the player empowerment era. If a player is disgruntled, they're going to make that be known, and they're going to make a trade demand. And then at that point, it kind of damages some of the leverage that the organization has. I also don't want to see the Niners go down a road where they're thinking about franchise tagging Deebo Samuel. I think they should get it done. I think they will get it done at some point in training camp, because this guy is a unique, special talent who's uber talented. But you're kind of walking a fine line, especially with the player empowerment era that we've seen kind of trickle in from the NBA to the NFL.
You mentioned the situation at the quarterback position, and at one point, Jimmy Garoppolo and Baker Mayfield are kind of like the only two guys left on this quarterback carousel this offseason that has just been flying around in circles. Everything that I have read has seemed to indicate that the keys are now really being given to Trey Lance. I mean, is there any reason to believe that this is not going to be his offense next season?
Look, if they don't move forward with Trey Lance as a starting quarterback, I think it's organizational malpractice. You budgeted for him. You exhausted so much draft capital to take him at number 3. And I think when you look at his specific skill set and where the modern day NFL is trending toward, he's everything that you want. And everybody wants to say, okay, Trey Lance is raw. He's not ready to play. I mean, we knew this when he was coming into the league. He was 20 years old when he was drafted out of North Dakota State. He played one game in 2020 because of a COVID-shortened season at the FCS level, and he only played one full season of FCS level football. So the fact that he's raw shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. But I think about him and what he can do in terms of him being a dynamic quarterback who's a dual threat to opposing defenses. I think that he's really going to be able to have so much success because he's got a bazooka for an arm. I put his arm strength up there with Patrick Mahomes as well as Josh Allen. I think his ability to keep the defense on its heels and off guard with his running threat is so valuable in today's NFL. And what I loved about Trey Lance and his 2 starts last year was the growth that I saw during the games in both of those starts, where you saw him take strides forward. And I also liked his pocket awareness and pocket mobility. A lot of young quarterbacks feel that pocket kind of collapse around them, and they decide to just take off right away if they know that they have that talent with their legs and that ability. Instead, Trey Lance kind of climbed the pocket, had a good feel, still went through his progressions, looked to throw the football before he ran. And I'm high on him because of that, because I think that shows some maturity at the quarterback position for a young player. And then the supporting cast, I think, is really, really important. I like to say this a lot. Like, so many times we see quarterbacks go to certain organizations and they end up busting because they don't have any stability. They don't have a good head coach, a general manager, a good supporting cast. It's almost like a child who grows up in a chaotic household, right? If a kid doesn't have emotional stability, emotional support, and the parents are never there for him, like, chances are they're not going to be successful down the road. That's not the case for Trey Lance from a football sense, because he has a great head coach. He has those elite aforementioned players that we talked about earlier. I think he's been set up nicely for success, and I think it's time to just let him get the keys to the offense and let's see what he can do.
And you make a great point. The jump from the college game to the pros in terms of maturity for these kids is tremendous. And so to have that support system is critical. You mentioned his arm, his ability to improvise. In terms of the offense looking different with him and what Shanahan wants to do with him, is that really what we're going to take notice of the most? The fact that this is a guy who, like you mentioned, is dynamic, who can run the ball, but also won't be afraid to take some shots down the field, to use more of the field than Jimmy Garoppolo was seemingly able to do, or really unable to do?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Like earlier, I had alluded to the offense being a little bit more dangerous and explosive with Trey Lance. I think you're going to be able to see him kind of bring the best out of other players on this offense. Because of his arm strength, I think the offense is going to get a lot more vertical. I also think because of the arm strength and his specific mobility, the ground game, which is already the forte and really the strength of this offense is also going to be more dangerous because linebackers and players at that second and third level, even guys around the line of scrimmage, they're not sure whether Trey Lance is going to pull it and tuck it and run or if he's going to hand it off. So there's an unpredictable nature, more so with Trey Lance as a starting quarterback as compared to Jimmy Garoppolo. And also just because of his ability solely as an athlete, as a thrower, as a quarterback, you're going to see the field stretch a little bit more vertically. And I think because of that, Brandon Ayuk's going to have an opportunity to break out. There's not going to be as much of a focus on Deebo Samuel as a running back and a wide receiver because you have to account for Trey Lance. George Kittle, in about a month's sample size last year, was excellent there for a stretch and then cooled off a little bit. But I think in the red zone and I think in between the hashes, in between the 20s, Trey Lance is going to be able to target him. That's just what happens when you have a more dynamic player at the quarterback position in Trey Lance. I don't think the offense is going to change because the offense is already quarterback friendly and Kyle Shanahan really does stick to his scheme. But from a play calling standpoint, I think you're going to see more explosive plays down the field, both through the air and on the ground.
Let's just end with the draft if we can. I mean, you mentioned the draft capital that was exhausted to bring him into the fold, and they're going to see the results of that, of course. But they do have 9 picks, even though, we won't see them in the first round. Who should they be targeting? Let's start with just which positions you feel like are the most glaring that they need to address in the draft.
I think they could go any of these directions in round 2 with pick number 61, and they don't have a first round pick until 2024 because of that trade up for Trey Lance. I wouldn't be surprised if they go offensive line, if they go safety, or they go wide receiver. I mean, oftentimes we see teams in the NFL draft go best player available. For the 49ers, they're in a unique circumstance and situation because they don't pick until 61. So a lot of really good players are going to be off the board. But I think those position groups are all positions of need. Cornerback, offensive line, wide receiver. I wouldn't even be surprised if they go safety. Todd McShay of ESPN in his latest mock draft had Nick Cross, the safety out of Maryland, going to San Francisco. I like him. His physical makeup is good. I'd rather go Jaquan Brisker out of Penn State if they do decide to go safety. Abraham Lucas is a guy out of Washington State who has tackle and guard versatility, and the Niners as an organization really do prioritize having that positional versatility. So I'm really intrigued to see where they go because I'm not exactly sure where they're going to go. And if they go best player available, it could be any position on the football field, honestly.
Where do you think they should go? I mean, one thing to kind of speculate what you think they will do, but I mean, for you covering the team so closely, would you say like, hey, this is the position that they must address?
So if Christian Watson out of North Dakota State is available, he's 6'5" and ran a 4.3 40 at the NFL Scouting Combine. He also played with Trey Lance at North Dakota State. I love the fact that you could have that kind of familiarity between Lance and a former teammate. If he's there, I'd like him. If he's not there, I don't think they need to go wide receiver. I might think about maybe getting the next right tackle, maybe getting your next center. Mike McGlinchey has question marks coming off that torn quad. He also lost a lot of weight this offseason, so I'm a little bit concerned there. Alex Mack is in his mid-30s. He's been playing in the NFL for a decade and a half. I'm not sure how long he has left, and it should be a priority, whether it's right tackle or center, to protect Trey Lance. I also think like they could go edge rusher, which is another position of importance. You have Nick Bosa. I think they're going to sign him to a contract extension. But if you can get a stud opposite of Nick Bosa on a rookie contract while you're paying Bosa a lot of money to get 2 really premier pass rushers, I think they could go that route. So those are kind of the areas that I'm kind of leaning toward right now with a couple of weeks left until the NFL draft.
Chase Senior, phenomenal insight. Thank you so much for being with me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.